So, welcome to this evening's program, and tonight we're going to be focusing on land records. My name is Bryna O'Sullivan. I am a Middletown, Connecticut-based professional genealogist and French to English genealogical translator. And if you'll give us just a moment, we're having one more issue with the handout. We'll get going with that and go from there. So we are in webinar mode this evening. If you could please place all questions in either the Q&A or in the chat button, we'd greatly appreciate it. We just got both handouts in the chat, I believe. If you have any issues, please let me know. So from there, let's get started. So our topic tonight is actually a mixture of land records and house history. And in case anyone's wondering, the library is having some technical difficulties, so forgive me. I will be present and moderate at the same time, so please be patient with me. We're going to start this evening by talking about accessing Connecticut land records. Connecticut has a somewhat unique system of land record keeping. It is one of 3 states to store land records on the town level. Rhode Island and Vermont are the others. Most states store them on the county level. Land records are stored by the town or city clerk, not the county clerk or the county recorder. And what makes Connecticut's land record research particularly challenging is that land records are stored in the town in which the land was located at the time the transaction occurred. Doesn't sound like a big deal, and it isn't if you're dealing with late 20th century or early 21st century transactions. However, if you go back a bit, it gets a little more complicated. So why specifically does this make research challenging? Here is an 1813 map of Connecticut. You'll note New Canaan is down here. We have Norwalk, Fairfield, Wilton, Weston, and Stamford in various directions. And let's move forward a little bit to a 1971 map. As you'll note, the state boundaries have not changed very much during that time period, but the number of towns has. Between 1800 and the present, we went from 107 towns to 169. That's without gaining significant amounts of land. What does that mean? Towns subdivide, which can make locating land records particularly challenging. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll do my best to answer all of them. So when we talk about towns subdividing, what does that mean? We have a system in Connecticut we call the parent town. So basically, when a new town was created, the land had to come from somewhere. Most often, it came from an existing town. Thankfully for us, the Connecticut State Library has actually made a fairly good list of the history of all of Connecticut's 169 towns. This link is in your handout. It's called the List of Connecticut Towns and Counties, including your established. And this is what the page looks like. It has an overarching history that explains that Connecticut is currently divided into 169 towns with distinct geographical boundaries, each of which may contain incorporated cities or boroughs, as well as villages, post offices, and railroad depots without a distinct government. So this is another issue you may run into, but it doesn't impact land records directly. So when we're dealing with land records, we're dealing specifically with towns. So let's go ahead and look at the towns. We have the town name, the county, the year established, the parent town, and the history of incorporation on the bottom of the page. So if we look specifically at New Canaan, here's the profile. New Canaan is in Fairfield County. It was established in 1801 from Norwalk and Stamford. So any land transactions in New Canaan before May of 1801, the records are in either Norwalk or Stamford. So next question, where are those records held and when would they have started? Well, Norwalk was founded in 1651 and Stamford in 1641. So in all likelihood, if you can identify which section of New Canaan came from Norwalk and which section came from Stamford, you'll be able to find your land records. You're simply looking in the land records of that particular town. So again, Connecticut has not specifically changed its boundaries as a state in the last 100 to 200 years, but it has changed the number of towns. To identify the correct town, you have to think about what town the transaction was in. Essentially, where was the property at the time the transaction occurred? So for New Canaan, if the transaction occurred after May of 1801, it's in New Canaan. If the transaction occurred prior to May of 1801, it's likely in either Norwalk or Stamford. Any questions thus far? So step one to finding a Connecticut land record is always identifying the town the property was in at the time of the transfer. So land in New Canaan after 1801 is still in New Canaan. Land that is now in New Canaan may have been in Norwalk or Stamford prior. Step two to finding a Connecticut land record is determining how to access the records of that town. Unfortunately for us as researchers, most towns have not digitized all of their records. A few have. And there is no statewide standardized system for making records available, except if you want to go to the town clerk. Every town clerk in the state has physical copies of all of the land records. Obviously, that is doable for some towns and may not be doable in other cases. So your second step to finding a land record is always determine how to access the records of that town. A good way to start is a web search for the town's clerk's office and the town name. Again, the town clerk is who holds land records. So if they have any records online, they're generally linked to the town clerk office website. Next, you want to explore that site to see what's available digitally. Next, check to see what's on Family Search. And finally, check for the gaps. Find out what you'll need to visit the vault to access. So unfortunately for us, most of New Canaan's land records are not available online. So the indexes are, and they cover the period from 1960 to 2022. They can be accessed either directly through the link in the slide or by following the town clerk's website to townclerks-records.com. Excuse me, Connecticut-townclerks-records.com. Family Search has some better options. So before we get there, does anyone have any questions? Okay, if you're not familiar with Family Search, it is a free genealogical website run by the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They have different levels of contracts depending on the record. So that's something you need to pay attention to with Connecticut land records. But for New Canaan, they have some, not all, but some records up to 1907 and indexes up to 1937. So if you think about it, that means they have coverage from 1801 theoretically up to 1937. Now, contracts matter here. The way Family Search has set up their access, some Connecticut land records can be freely accessible from home. I believe offhand, East Haven's are. However, the vast majority need to be accessed from a Family Search affiliate. That is the case for New Canaan. To find an affiliate, you're going to go to familysearch.org, this is the main page, and click on the question mark. The first item in the dropdown is Find a Family History Center and Family Search Affiliate Library. Click on it. So in this case, I went ahead and put in New Canaan, and it points out that the closest affiliate library right now is in Wilton. I believe this may be in the works for New Canaan as well. So if you wanted to access the New Canaan land records digitally, you could go to Wilton right now and spend time in their library and do that. To search the records, you have to be in the library and you have to be logged in. So you saw earlier, there is a create an account button in the upper right-hand corner of the page. If you go to www.familysearch.org and click on create an account, it will prompt you to fill out the form. It will send a link to your email. Once you do that, you should be able to go back to this site and sign in. So you'll need to be signed in once you're in the affiliate library. Once you're signed in, you click on search and then catalog. Search and then catalog. You go ahead and put in United States, Connecticut, Fairfield, New Canaan. You could change this for any other Connecticut town. Click on search. And this would be your results list. So you'll see there's an entry for land and property. Click on that. And click on land records, 1801 to 1907. General index, 1801 to 1937. This is what the catalog page will look like. It tells you who created the records, that's the town clerk, how many microfilm reels there are, where they came from, etc. If you scroll down the page, you'll see this. Now, I warn you, right now you see a camera image with a key on top. That means the collection is locked. The reason you're seeing this is because I took this picture before I went to an affiliate to access the records. But if you're seeing it in an affiliate, you're either not signed in, or once in a while we run into an issue in which the affiliates have not made laptop use possible for their family search connection. So that would be the questions you'd want to ask. Are you signed in? And can I access family search via your Wi-Fi? Once you are correctly signed in, the key will disappear. You'll just see the camera. You have to be aware as you're doing this process, some records are not going to be digitized. To cover the period between 1907 and 2022, you need to visit the town clerk's vault. Any questions thus far? This will get a little more comprehensible as we get going. So step 3 to finding a land record. You have to access the records. So you'll start hearing some terms as we're working that may feel a little confusing. One of them is a field card or a property card. These are records that are kept by the town tax assessor, not the town clerk, the town tax assessor, that gives a little bit of the history of a property. It helps them decide the value. If you are doing a house history, so you're tracing the history of your property, the tax assessor's field card can be a good place to start because it will list the most recent transactions. The last transaction should have a volume and page. That volume and page tells you where the deed is located. If for some reason you aren't doing a house history or you're looking for an older record, you would start by checking the grantor grantee index to find the volume and page. As you're doing your research, you want to be sure that you check both indexes because properties do not always pass by sale, so they may show up in one but not in the other. Grantor is seller, grantee is buyer. Once you have found the volume and page, you'll want to pull or locate and copy the deed. If you can't find a listing, you need to remember that land could be passed by will rather than sale, and you need to check probate files instead. In Connecticut, there's one other possibility. Some of our older land transactions included what was called a minister's lease. They were 1,000-year leases, so they won't show up in the land records, and they were set up by the town. To find them, you'll need to review the town meeting minutes. Any questions before we start getting into a case study here? Please feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Okay. I realize I'm wading into a bit of local controversy right now, so we're going to avoid that section. We're actually going to look at the older library. But we need some back history to get there. So the library was first constructed in 1913 in the quarter of Erie and Maine. So 1913, are those deeds online? Let's go back and check. So 1913 is between 1907 and 2022. They're not online, but the indexes are. So because I was interested in the history of the library and I knew some basic history, I did not go to the property cards. Where I started was the grantor grantee index. And I assumed, since the library was first constructed in 1913, that the land must have been purchased sometime prior to 1913. So I started looking for a grantee index indicating when the land was purchased. Again, I went to family search, and then catalog. I was logged in when I did this. I'm not in the screenshot, forgive me. Put in New Canaan, clicked search, went into land and property, went into land records, went to that catalog page, and scrolled down until I found an index that was likely to cover the library purchase. What was I using? In most cases, land that is purchased in relationship to the town has the town's name in it someplace. So I just assumed I was looking for something along the lines of New Canaan Library. So I looked for the grantee index, that's the buyer, B to Z, 1801 to 1937. Clicked on the camera. Again, I'm not signed in here because I took this picture before I actually did this. Went into the appropriate reel and started looking. So here is what a grantee index looks like. The grantee, or the buyer, is on the left side of the page. The next column over is the seller. If anyone's feeling like they can't read this, hold on one second. Here's what we're actually looking at. So we are looking at New Canaan Reading Room and Circulating Library Corporation of NC, probably New Canaan. as the grantee or the buyer. These are all of the various sellers. We notice all of these properties are on Main and Cherry. So those records refer to the current library property. But I got curious because I noticed that there were 2 records listed just above that refer to a different property. And yes, I could have found this from the library website, but I hadn't looked there first. Let's go back and see if we can look closely. I cut this off just slightly, so forgive me. We have a purchase by the New Canaan Reading Room and Circulating Library Corporation from Benedict Theodore W. et al. Et al. Means and others. And it's recorded in volume 19, page 50. It's a warranty deed dated October 24th, 1884. And it's for Railroad Avenue. We have another item directly underneath that's the same deed description. This one is for Benedict Julius et al., volume 19, page 50. Again, it's a warranty, and it's dated October 24th, 1884, on Railroad Avenue. So I went back to this main catalog page, looked for volume 19, found page 50, and this is what I got. This is the property on Railroad Avenue. At the time of purchase, it was an empty lot. By 1889, the library, which at that time was an association library rather than a public library, was operating on the property on the 2nd floor. So the image I have on left is from the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps. Pink tells us that it is a brick building, and there is a reason for that. I'm going to try to blow this up. Hopefully this will work. In the deed, it says, it is understood, agreed, and stipulated by both the contracting parties, and is made a part of the consideration that there shall never be a frame or wood building erected on the said premises without the written consent of the said grantors, their successors, heirs, or assigns, under the penalty of a forfeiture of the title to said grantors, their successors, heirs, or assigns, who may then enter upon and have full legal possession of their own property. So when this particular property was originally sold, there was a stipulation included in it that they could not build a frame building upon it. If you look at the building, you can guess why. It's really right on top of the next building. As a result, they ended up building in wood. Give me just 1 second. I get this. PowerPoint never likes being blown up. So once I saw that, I had a couple of questions. What happened to the property between 1885 and 1913 when the new library was constructed? Well, I went back and went to the grantor index this time. So looked at the seller and looked at the New Canaan Reading Room as the seller. I noted 2 deeds. On volume 22, page 24, there is a lease to the town of New Canaan for the property of Railroad Avenue. On volume 33, page 108, there is a warranty deed for the property on Railroad Avenue. These volumes are not digitized. This is one of the challenges with working with the family search records. So I have to either go to the town hall to get a copy, or I can infer from the index. That's what I ended up doing. I did the latter because the map gave me some hints. It looks like the town leased some of the property in 1885. If you look really closely at the Sanborn map, it says town clerk. So they were operating the town clerk on the first floor and the reading room on the second. And they likely sold the property in 1913 as the new library was being built. Now, I did a little bit of review of the property description, and based on the property description, it's currently a parking lot. Any questions thus far? So my next question was, what was on the site of the 1885 library before it was sold? So again, I went back to the indexes. We knew who sold it, so they had to have bought it at some point. And I looked for Benedict Theodore W., because he was one of the two sellers, Junius was the other, and found him in the grantee index. Purchasing property from Benedict John, and it's volume 17, page 684, and it was on Railroad Avenue and Main Street. We had a question in the chat about the current location of the property. I believe it's now Elm Street, if I'm not mistaken. It's near the current railroad station. So again, I went thinking I want to know more about what was on that site prior to the library. I went back to the index and I looked for grantee. Found Theodore and then purchasing property from John. This is the same process you will follow if you were doing a house history. You will look at someone buying, you'll look at someone buying property, the last person in the chain, then look at the grantor, the person that sold it. They had to have bought it at some point. So you're going to go back to the indexes, and instead of looking at them as a grantor, you're going to look at them as a grantee, a buyer. That's where we are right now. So we're going to find volume 17, page 684. And here's the deed. Know all men by these presents that I, John Benedict of New Canaan, Fairfield County, for the consideration of $1, full satisfaction of Junius Benedict and Theodore W. Benedict of New Canaan aforesaid, do by these presents release and forever quit claim to the said J. and T.W. Benedict all right, title, interest, claim, and demand whatsoever, which I the said release or, ought to have to one certain tract of land with the buildings thereon lying in New Canaan in the quantity of 1/8 of an acre, situate on the northerly corner of Railroad Avenue and the main street in the village of New Canaan, and then we have all the bounds, so we know who else was nearby. Now this property seems to have passed down in the Benedict family. How do I know that? A land transaction fee of $1, not always, but most often strongly indicates a family relationship. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself. We can take a pause right here. We give, I believe raise hand is the option to do that, or you can put questions in the chat as well. I'm going to back out of my PowerPoint right now so I can see everybody's options. So if you'd like to raise hands to ask a question or put questions in the chat or Q&A. Got a quiet group tonight.
It is quiet tonight. I just wanted to pop in and say hello. I'm Sam Connell from the library, and I'm sorry I had some tech issues earlier this evening. But a lot of you asked, I dropped the handout in the chat. So you can go ahead and double click that and launch it. It's a Word document, and that way you can follow along.
Sounds good. So any questions in the meantime, and we'll keep going from there. So a couple of bits of advice from someone that has done this for a long time. There are some indexes that have known issues on family search. So if you ever find that you cannot find your family for whatever reason, you may need to visit the town clerk just to access their their indexes. I'm not sure what the particular issue was. The family search indexes tend to not be as complete. The other factor that most people don't consider, if you inherit land, now it is filed with the town clerk anyway. That was not the case in some periods. So if you get partway through a house history and cannot find a deed for your property, you will need to check probate files. So forgive me for just one moment as I go ahead and pull up one of the handouts so we can walk through some of the other options. Now, at this point, we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into what does a house look like? How do we find that out? This will be helpful for those of you that are doing house history. It may also be helpful for those of you that are looking at your ancestors' properties and want to know what their house looked like when they were living there. So I'm going to walk you through some of the next handout. We probably won't have time to cover all of it, but I can give you a good grounding. So one of the ways you can learn what a property looked like is an architectural survey. An architectural survey covers the physical construction of the house. So when a genealogist talks about house history and a preservationist talks about house history, they're talking about two different things. When a genealogist talks about house history, we're talking about who lived in the house. So we're interested in land records, we're interested in the occupants. When a preservationist talks about house history, they're interested in the architecture, the structure, more often than the occupants. Doesn't mean they're not interested, but the focus is the structure. That can still come in handy for a genealogist. So forgive me as I go back to screen sharing. This is one of the best ways to get architectural surveys. This program called the Historic American Building Survey is run through the Library of Congress now. It is the only active WPA project still in the works. So this has been running straight through since the Works Progress Administration. It is not consistent coverage of every property in a locale, but it can be a great way to get plans, photos, and more. So I went to search this collection, put in New Canaan. Yes, we are getting the Merritt Parkway, but we are getting lots of images of the Merritt Parkway. And if we go further down, here, for example, is the architectural detail on the New Canaan Railroad Station. If you go through this site in detail, you will find properties that are no longer standing. So spend some time with it if you think your family's property might be on here at all. It is hit or miss by locale, but you are very likely to find something of value. Some are just photos. I've also found full architectural plans of specific properties. So again, this is the Historic American Building Survey. It is the only WPA project that is still running. But in Connecticut, we have something helpful that came from it. The original survey has been made available by the Connecticut State Library. It's often referred to as the Old House Survey or the Architectural Survey. Unfortunately, for some reason, New Canaan is not covered within this. I'm not entirely sure why. I will attempt to clarify that. If you have questions about it, please feel free to send me an email. But this is the original 1930s era survey, and I'm going to open a profile just so you can see what it looks like. So here is an image of a property that was in Andover. At the time, they were asking the resident for the history. So they believe that it was built between 1810 and 1835, and that the original owner was the Baptist Church. The present owner was Allen H. Newton. It's the fourth house north of the Congregational Church. And then we get material about the construction. So again, this is the original version of the survey. The contemporary version is on the Library of Congress website. You have the direct link to both in your handouts. If for some reason you cannot access it that way, this is part of the State Library's digital materials. A little word of advice for those of you that are doing a lot of Connecticut research. The original notes for the Old House Survey have ended up in some of Connecticut's public libraries. Not all, but if you're looking at a specific town, it is always worth checking. I'm in Middletown. I know the original notes from the WPA survey are in our public library. Now, if your house is on the National Historic Register or your family's property is on the National Register, those surveys have also been digitized. This is the link from your handout, and they are actually made available through the National Archives. Maybe if I can do this quickly, let me see if I can get there. So they give you an option to search by state. And we are within the National Historic Register listings, and we could go into Connecticut and go all the way through, and we'd be likely to find more information. Now, while the structures are always fascinating, most of us look at this as how can I find context? How can I learn more about the community? That's where maps come in handy. So UConn has a map collection that can be of help. This is the Magic Historical Map Collection. Again, these links are in your handout. And they have included an 1868 map of New Canaan. So I'm scrolling down just to try to get there. Give me 1 second. They usually have 1 to 2 a town. Coverage varies widely. Here it is. I'm going to click on the image to bring it up. These are usually better downloaded. They're included in Flickr, so they're a little bit hard to navigate online. And you can see how you could get an idea of who your ancestors' neighbors might be from these atlases. This is images from an atlas. Most of them are. If you look, you literally have neighbor, 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 neighbor. So right here we have the school, William Chichester, Mrs. Avery, H. Terrell, C. Whaley, etc. The David Rumsey Map Collection out of Stanford also has some atlases. So I'm going to search this collection in the upper right-hand corner, putting in New Canaan. And yes, we get Canaan, so we get a lot of biblical references. But if we go down a little bit, here is an 1893 atlas that provides us with a little bit of detail of town. Be patient if something doesn't load. Once in a while it freezes. These are large files. So here's the Baptist church, the Congregational church, the Episcopal church, the Catholic church. You could get an outline of town at the time. Now, the Sanborn map I used earlier was pulled from the Library of Congress. And this is their collection. So to search within this collection, I would put a New Canaan. And you can note that I have maps available from 1884 up through 1912. For me, the last couple are for New Hampshire, but that one is for New Canaan. I'm going to open this so that you can take a quick look at the actual makeup. And go from there. So as things expanded, the Sanborn maps will expand. So go from 1 page to 5 or 6. You may have to do some digging to find your ancestor's neighborhood. Also, you want to look for the color key. So the key tells you the materials that made up your ancestor's home. So red is brick, blue is stone, gray is iron, brown is adobe, green is some sort of special material. So this is Grace home. We have the sand, coal, and flower seed manufacturing, etc., etc. Now, I could go through these maps and likely find the various library properties following this step by step by step. And if I want to save one to my computer, I can click on Go next to the download button down here. Now, the Library of Congress Sanborn map collection is not complete. So it should be noted that the Connecticut State Library has purchased access to the digital images of the Connecticut towns. Those are available to Connecticut residents with a Connecticut State Library card. However, if you're looking for an easy place to start, the Library of Congress website is really effective for that. Any questions about the architectural surveys or maps? I'm going to show you just one more map website. This is one of my favorites. The Library of Congress has something called the Panoramic Map Collection. Unfortunately, New Canaan is not included in here, but my hometown is. Why do I like panoramic maps? Think of pre-internet version of Google Earth. So here is an aerial view of Middletown, circa 1915. And say that I know my ancestor lived on Court Street. I may have to do a little bit of digging to find it. Here's Court Street. And I could start trying to match the cross streets to find their home. This is a residential home right there. So the panoramic maps allow you to see how things were laid out, the community, and physically what your ancestor's home may have looked like. These are again available from the Library of Congress. And we can go from there. So we had a question in the chat that if you're out of state, we need a Connecticut researcher to assist. Do we need a Connecticut researcher to assist? I believe that's with the Sanborn maps. No, not necessarily. So the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company created those maps to accurately assess the likelihood of fire damage. That's the simple answer to that question. As a result, they also discovered they had a resale market. There are a lot of institutions in the US that have copies of the Sanborn maps. The Connecticut collection that they've purchased is part of a ProQuest collection. I would guess some research institutions have the full collection of multiple states. If you are not in Connecticut and you need access to a Connecticut town for the Sanborn fire insurance maps, I'd start with the Library of Congress, see if the maps that you need are there. Then look to see what other institutions may hold maps for the Sanborn collections. Library of Congress doesn't necessarily have the full run, but they do have a good chunk. We had a note that the town or village historians may have them. True. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, most towns do not have a town historian. A good resource is always your local public library, though. Don't forget to check them. So any other questions about the maps? I noted a few other map sites on your handout, but we don't really have time to review them. There's just one other database on here I want you to be sure to be aware of. So let me go ahead and open that. If you haven't seen it, you want to play with the Connecticut Digital Archive. This is a somewhat newish online resource for Connecticut history, genealogy, etc., etc. It is a subscription site, but it is used by a number of local historical societies, museums, libraries, etc., to put up their material. So they pay the subscription, you do not. That means that you have a really good chance of finding some information on your home, property, ancestors' property, etc. I just went ahead and put in a search for New Canaan. You'll note immediately I'm coming up with maps, I'm coming up with histories, I'm coming up with photos. Here's a photo of Elm Street. Looks like 1950 or so. I've also included in your handout, there is a direct link to a number of architectural surveys. I believe the Connecticut Office of Historic Preservation placed their older surveys at UConn some time ago. Those surveys are now online. So in addition to the other architectural surveys, check Connecticut Digital Archive. So we've covered a lot of material very quickly here. I want to stop and make sure that we have time to ask and answer questions. But just so you're organized in your head, our plan for this evening was to talk through accessing land records and how to work with them, as well as some basic information that may be helpful if you're doing a house history or simply want images of your ancestors' home, including architectural surveys and sources for maps, and then the Connecticut Digital Archive. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and ask if there are any questions. We can put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I think we might be able to unmute, so let me see if I can go ahead and do that. Yes, Leslie. Sorry about that. There we go.
My question really would be for last week.
Okay.
About the family search site.
Mm-hmm.
How do they handle like a second marriage?
So I presume you're talking about accessing records.
Yeah, if a person was married and had children from a second marriage, I know when they show the family trees,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it doesn't include the second family.
That's because it hasn't been added yet. So remember, those family trees are created by people physically adding material to the tree.
Right.
So
And I know when I went to put in my own family and I put in my mother and they wanted to know about a father. So I put in my own father, but then it wouldn't let me put in my brother because he was the child of her second marriage.
so
It wouldn't,
you can do it, but you have to go into the tree. Instead of accessing it from your tree, you have to search the general tree, find her, and then add him that way.
okay, there was no other record. I was creating it. So,
It's an awkward system, but that's how they have it set up, unfortunately. So the only way I think you can add second marriages is through the main tree.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I know the land records can feel a tad bit overwhelming, so I want to be sure that you've had a chance to ask any questions you might have. Gets really interesting when you're dealing with properties in the 1700s where you don't have street addresses to find the property. So you're relying on the description to locate the specific property. Pay attention to those descriptions, they matter, and the maps can help you locate the correct property.
I just want to say thank you so much, Bryna. That's always just, you're just always so full of some wonderful information and you're such an expert. I did want to let everyone know that you did help us, and the New Canaan Library is working on becoming an affiliate library for Family Search.
Great. So we had a couple of questions. We had a question about researching in New York City. The system should be somewhat similar. The properties are going to be held on the county level in New York City instead of the state, or excuse me, instead of the town. And they are digitized for the most part, I believe. Don't quote me on that, please. If they are digitized, they're on Family Search. I will try to check that as I'm answering the other questions. Let's see, what other questions do we have? So we have properties on a route number, is that correct? So properties on a route number, you will have to try to locate the maps. Keep in mind, properties that are on a route in Connecticut, that route is not the only name. So Route 1, anyone remember, is the Boston Post Road. Try to find the second name. It will help you balance out your search. Often routes will be highways as well. So we had a question about the most interesting case I handled. Well, doing house histories, we discovered by accident that the town had been donated back land that they legally owned for the public library. It was a case of a minister's lease, and they had leased it to the minister in the early 1800s. And by the time they were going to build the town library about 1900, they were given land from the minister's family and didn't realize that it was legally theirs. It was kind of an interesting bit of history. So forgive me as I'm quickly checking Family Search in regards to New York City. What other questions do we have in the meantime? Please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question out loud or put questions in the chat. And I was quickly able to answer that many, if the New York City land records are online, I'm just confirming with Kings County. I see them in the 1700s up through 1886 are available online. So we had a question about if my research has uncovered any incorrectly sold land or other controversies. I don't do this heavily. I do this in conjunction with other client research, so I haven't run into anything hugely controversial, but I have found a couple of cases where there were deeds that were not filed. So I think if someone wanted to challenge the chain of title on that property, they probably could. Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat. If you'd like to email me directly, please feel free. I'm glad to answer questions. Otherwise, do we have any final questions? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Bryna. This two-part series was wonderful. A lot of people are asking me to make sure that you come back and teach us more about genealogy. So I really appreciate it. I know that everyone really enjoyed both of the classes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad to hear you will have affiliate status in the works.
Yes, we're working on it. They responded very quickly. So we're hoping to
Great.
submit it and set that up. Yes, we're getting some enthusiasm in the chat to have you back. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, for joining us. And I hope that you all have a wonderful evening.